"Sir, you're under arrest for destruction of property." The handcuffs clicked cold against my wrists while my neighbor Linda Cromwell stood triumphant on her perfectly manicured lawn, cell phone still in hand from calling 911. My crime? Planting native Colorado wildflowers in my own front yard. But here's what Linda didn't know when she dialed those three numbers. My wife Elena sentences people like her for a living. And what happened next turned our quiet neighborhood into the most expensive legal lesson Linda would ever receive. Let me start from the beginning. I'm David Chen, 54 years old, retired from Denver Public Works, after 28 years of keeping city infrastructure running, while politicians took credit for everything that worked and blamed us for everything that didn't. My wife Elena has been a municipal court judge for 18 years, the kind who handles drunk drivers and zoning violations with the patience of a kindergarten teacher and the backbone of a steel girder. We moved to Maplewood Heights 2 years ago, chasing that retirement dream of a peaceful neighborhood where the biggest drama would be choosing between roses or daisies. You know these places, streets named after concepts like Harmony Lane and Serenity Drive, built on land where actual harmony and serenity used to grow before developers arrived with bulldozers and committees dedicated to the color beige. Our house sits modest and unassuming on Willow Creek Road. Nothing fancy except for the large front yard that caught Elena's eye. She'd spent decades dreaming of a real garden, while courthouse schedules left time for nothing more than a few spider plants in our old apartment windows. But what we didn't realize was that our simple gardening dreams would put us on a collision course with Linda Cromwell, the kind of person who treats neighborhood bylaws like biblical commandments. Linda, 59 years old, lives in the showcase house with the circular driveway that serves no purpose except announcing that someone important lives behind those oversized columns. Former insurance adjuster turned full-time HOA enforcer, she patrols our streets like a suburban sheriff with a clipboard instead of a badge. The woman coordinates her garden tools by color and irons her workout clothes. Everything seemed normal for the first 18 months. We paid our HOA fees, maintained regulation grass height, and avoided parking anything larger than a compact car in our driveway. Elena would wave at neighbors during morning jogs. I'd help jumpstart dead batteries during winter cold snaps. Standard suburban neighborliness. Then last spring, Elena decided to replace our struggling Kentucky bluegrass with plants that actually belonged in Colorado soil. We're talking black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, and native bunch grasses, vegetation that had been thriving here long before suburban planners decided desert landscapes needed constant irrigation. She spent weekends on her hands and knees, the earthy scent of fresh mulch mixing with morning coffee as she carefully transplanted seedlings that would eventually create a natural ecosystem instead of a water-hungry lawn that required weekly chemical treatments to stay artificially green. That's when Linda struck, and trust me, you won't believe what she tried to pull. I was adjusting sprinkler heads on a Tuesday morning, savoring that first sip of coffee while watching Elena Deadhead Spent Blooms, when I heard the sharp tap-tap-tap of business heels on concrete. 7:45 a.m., and there's Linda marching up our walkway, wearing a pressed pantsuit and enough perfume to fumigate a small building. "This landscaping violates our community aesthetic standards," she announced, waving what looked like a legal document printed on someone's home computer. "I'm issuing a $150 fine for unauthorized vegetation modification." Elena stood slowly, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. In her calm courtroom voice, she asked, "Which specific covenant section does this violate?" Linda's nostrils flared like a bull seeing red. Section 8.3 clearly mandates that all landscaping maintain established community visual harmony. "Actually," Elena said, her tone still patient as morning sunshine, Section 8.3 only addresses dead or diseased plant removal. These are healthy native species. I know what these rules mean. I helped write them. And there it was, the moment we realized we weren't dealing with someone enforcing actual regulations, but someone making them up as she went along. Because Elena had done something Linda clearly hadn't. She'd read every page of our HOA covenants, with the same attention she applied to complex legal statutes. The actual rules mentioned maintaining grass at reasonable height, removing dead vegetation, and keeping yards free of debris or inappropriate storage. Nothing about plant species, nothing about aesthetic standards, nothing that would make a wildflower garden illegal. But Linda had a pattern, and what we discovered about her other victims will make your blood boil. Over the next week, Elena's evening jogs became intelligence-gathering missions. Turns out 3 other families had been targeted by Linda's creative interpretation of neighborhood law. Robert Martinez, 71-year-old retired teacher, got fined $200 for growing vegetables where his late wife's flower garden used to flourish. Linda claimed front yard food production was inappropriate residential display. Jennifer Walsh, single mother working 2 jobs, paid $250 to power wash chalk art from her own driveway after Linda declared children's sidewalk drawings were unsightly temporary markings that violated property appearance standards. The elderly couple on Maple Street received violations for excessive bird feeding after Linda decided their small bird bath attracted pest wildlife. Translation: Linda's morning phone calls were being interrupted by actual bird song. Every target shared common characteristics. They were either vulnerable, financially struggling, or just different enough to stand out in Linda's vision of suburban conformity. Elena set down her coffee mug that morning with the quiet determination that makes experienced attorneys nervous in her courtroom. "We're not paying this fine," she said. Linda didn't handle rejection well. 3 days after Elena refused payment, we received a certified letter that made our postal carrier apologize for delivering it. The return address featured embossed lettering, because of course it did, and inside our fine had mysteriously doubled to $300. The letter claimed an emergency board meeting had reviewed our flagrant violation of community standards. Unanimous vote according to Linda's typed minutes. Enhanced penalties authorized. 10 days to pay or face a lien on our property. One problem with Linda's emergency meeting. Elena called every HOA board member that afternoon. "Emergency meeting?" Robert Martinez's gravelly voice crackled through our kitchen speakerphone. "Hell, I've been in Phoenix visiting my daughter all week." Same story from the other 2 board members. No notification, no vote, no meeting minutes, except the ones Linda had apparently written in her living room, while playing all the roles herself. Elena had absorbed HOA governance requirements during a particularly tedious municipal law seminar 3 years back, one of those mandatory continuing education courses where half the judges struggled to stay awake. Thank God she'd paid attention during the section about homeowner association oversight. Colorado requires written notice to homeowners at least 10 days before any fine can be imposed, plus a hearing where property owners can defend themselves. Linda had skipped both requirements, making her penalty about as legally binding as a grocery list. So, Elena filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Regulatory Division. Having a judge for a wife means knowing exactly which forms to file and precisely how to file them correctly. That's when Linda's surveillance campaign began. But what she was really doing was building evidence for her own prosecution. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, Linda's silver BMW would cruise our street like a patrol car checking for violations. The acrid smell of her exhaust mixed with morning dew as she'd park across from our house with the engine running and air conditioning blasting even in 75-degree weather. Click. A slightly brown blade of grass got photographed. Click. Garden hose coiled instead of properly stored. Click. Yesterday's newspaper still in the driveway at 6:45 a.m. warranted a close-up shot. The sound of her car door slamming became our neighborhood alarm clock. Robert started timing his morning walks to coincide with her inspections, just to watch her scramble back to her vehicle whenever he waved and called out, "Morning, Linda, getting your daily exercise?" But Linda's biggest mistake was assuming Elena was just another suburban housewife she could intimidate with official-sounding paperwork. While Linda built her photo collection documenting our wildflower crimes, Elena was quietly assembling something far more dangerous: actual evidence of systematic fraud. Elena started collecting stories during evening jogs, casual conversations at the grocery store, mental notes every time someone mentioned HOA troubles. The pattern was uglier than we'd imagined, and what Elena discovered next would destroy Linda's little kingdom forever. Robert's vegetable garden wasn't his first violation. Linda had previously fined him $75 for displaying his Korean War veteran license plate frame, claiming non-standard vehicle decoration violated parking area aesthetics. She only backed down when Robert's veteran buddies started asking pointed questions about community support for military service. Jennifer's chalk art represented violation number 3. First came a warning about children's bicycles being improperly stored in their own driveway. Then, a $75 fine when her 8-year-old left a soccer ball on the front lawn overnight. Each time, Jennifer paid rather than fight, because single mothers working 2 jobs don't have time for legal battles with neighborhood bullies. The widow on Pine Street got cited for excessive wildlife feeding after Linda decided morning birdsong interrupted her backyard conference calls. Every single target shared characteristics: vulnerable, different, or unwilling to bow before Queen Linda's suburban throne. Then, Elena discovered something that made her coffee mug pause halfway to her lips. She cross-referenced violation dates with HOA board meeting schedules from the past 2 years. Every single fine had been issued during weeks when at least 3 board members were traveling or unavailable. Linda wasn't just holding fake meetings, she was specifically timing her harassment campaigns for when no one could stop her. "David," Elena said that evening, her voice carrying the same intensity I'd heard when she sentenced repeat offenders. "She's not just power-hungry, she's calculating. This is systematic intimidation with a financial motive." The smell of fresh printer ink became permanent in our home office as Elena built her case one document at a time. Every photograph Linda took, every violation notice she issued, every arbitrary rule she invented was being documented by someone who understood evidence collection better than most prosecutors. Elena was playing chess while Linda was playing checkers, and Linda had no idea she was about to lose everything. 1 week after Elena filed her state complaint, Linda deployed what she thought was her nuclear option: the architectural review process. The certified letter arrived thick as a phone book and twice as pretentious, demanding our wildflower garden undergo landscape modification approval through the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. According to Linda's interpretation, any alteration to existing vegetation patterns required advance permission from a 3-member panel. Here's what's hilarious about architectural review committees. They're designed to prevent neighbors from painting houses neon pink or installing 15-foot garden gnomes, not to regulate what flowers grow in dirt that's been dirt for decades. But Linda scheduled a hearing anyway. 48 hours notice, community center basement, bring documentation. Oh, and she was bringing an expert witness, some landscaping professional who would explain why native Colorado plants were somehow inappropriate for Colorado soil. Elena hung up after receiving this news and smiled. Not her friendly neighbor smile, but her courtroom smile, the one that makes defense attorneys consider career changes. "She wants a formal hearing," Elena said, opening our bedroom closet. "Let's give her one she'll never forget." Thursday evening, 7 p.m., the community center basement smelled like decades of potluck dinners and budget meetings, a musty combination of industrial coffee, worn carpet, and the faint mustiness that no amount of air freshener could eliminate. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional beige that makes you question whether joy is legally permitted in municipal buildings. Linda sat at a folding table with 2 other board members, looking like she was chairing a corporate merger instead of discussing flower varieties. She'd brought a briefcase to a garden hearing in a community center basement. Elena walked in wearing her complete judicial regalia. I'm talking full black robes, perfectly pressed, name badge reading, "The Honorable Elena Chen, Municipal Court Judge." Hair pulled back in that severe style she wears for sentencing hearings. She carried a leather briefcase that cost more than most people's car payments. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Linda's confident posture deflated like a punctured tire. The other board members started fidgeting with their papers. One actually asked, "Are we in trouble?" "Good evening," Elena said in her official court voice, the one that makes public defenders stand straighter. "I understand we're here to discuss Colorado statutes regarding homeowner association authority over indigenous plant cultivation." Then she opened her briefcase and began laying out documents. Not just papers, a complete legal brief with case citations, precedent analysis, and photographs of every plant in our garden, with Latin names and ecological impact studies. Linda's expert witness turned out to be Roger Steinberg, her former insurance colleague who'd probably never identified a weed correctly in his entire life. When Elena asked about his qualifications, Roger mumbled something about 15 years in property management and understanding community standards. "Mr. Steinberg," Elena said, producing a field guide, "can you distinguish between Echinacea purpurea and Echinacea angustifolia?" What now?" Purple coneflower versus narrow-leaved coneflower. Both native species, both growing in my garden. Which one violates your aesthetic standards? Roger looked like he'd been asked to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. Well, it's not really about specific plants. Then what exactly are we reviewing? But the real bombshell came when Elena casually mentioned she'd spent the afternoon photographing Linda's own property violations. Turns out our HOA enforcer had some interesting landscaping choices that somehow never required architectural review. Mrs. Cromwell, can you explain why your decorative fence exceeds the 6-foot height restriction by 12 inches without approval? Linda's face went through several color changes. That's privacy screening. It's different. And your water feature installed without architectural review. It's a decorative pond. What about your shed placement? According to these measurements, it violates the 10-foot setback requirement by approximately 3 feet. The scratch of Elena's pen, recording every response, was the loudest sound in that basement. Every word, every excuse, every contradiction was being documented by someone who'd spent 18 years listening to people lie under oath. Robert had shown up to support us, along with Jennifer and 3 other neighbors who'd been targeted by Linda's violation spree. They sat in folding chairs like a jury, watching Linda's authority crumble in real time. This hearing is concluded, Linda finally announced, when Elena asked her to cite the specific covenant language requiring architectural review for native plants. But Elena wasn't finished. Actually, Mrs. Cromwell, I have one more question. When exactly did this architectural review committee receive legal authority to regulate indigenous vegetation? Silence. The kind of silence that makes fluorescent lights sound like jet engines. After getting demolished in her own hearing, Linda went straight for the neighborhood's wallet. And what she tried next will shock you. The letter arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered to every house in Maplewood Heights, with an official-looking seal that made people's blood pressure spike. Emergency Special Assessment Notice was stamped across the top, in red letters screaming crisis. According to Linda's calculations, the HOA's legal expenses defending against frivolous complaints and harassment from problem residents required an immediate $4,500 assessment from each household, due within 30 days. No exceptions, no payment plans, no appeals. The letter explained how one selfish neighbor was forcing the entire community to bear the cost of legal battles that could have been avoided if certain people just followed the rules like everyone else. Linda was trying to turn our neighbors against us by hitting retirement savings accounts. But she made one critical error. She called a mandatory neighborhood meeting to explain the assessment, scheduled for the same community center basement where Elena had just humiliated her architectural review committee. Sunday afternoon, 2:30 p.m., the basement was packed tighter than a subway car during rush hour. Retirees who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years showed up clutching Linda's assessment letter like evidence in a criminal case. Young families squeezed between folding chairs, bouncing toddlers who sensed adult tension and responded with appropriate chaos. The air was thick with anxiety and lingering smells from whatever church group had used the room that morning. Fried chicken and green bean casserole, comfort food that wasn't comforting anyone today. Linda stood at her folding table wearing a navy blazer that screamed, "Trust me with your money," flanked by 2 increasingly nervous board members. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation about HOA legal expenses using a projector older than most of the residents. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice carrying practiced insurance adjuster sincerity, "we're facing an unprecedented legal crisis because one household has decided to wage war against our community standards." She clicked to her first slide. Legal Defense Fund, $32,000 required. The number hung in that stale air like a death sentence for people living on fixed incomes. That's when Elena stood up. She'd been sitting in the back row wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking like any other concerned neighbor. But when she rose, something shifted in that room. Maybe it was her posture, or the way she'd been taking notes on a legal pad, or just the quiet confidence that comes from commanding courtrooms for nearly 2 decades. "Excuse me, Mrs. Cromwell," Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the cramped basement. "Before we discuss assessments, could you clarify exactly which legal expenses we're covering?" Linda's smile faltered. "Obviously the costs of defending against your harassment campaign and frivolous state complaints." "I see. And which law firm is representing the HOA in this defense?" We've retained Williams & Associates for all HOA legal matters. Elena nodded thoughtfully. Interesting, because according to the Colorado Open Records Act request I filed last Monday, the HOA has paid $52,000 to Cromwell Consulting Services over the past 18 months for various management fees. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat fields. Your company, Mrs. Cromwell, $52,000 for what services exactly? Linda's face was cycling through colors again. Those are legitimate property management consulting fees. For what specific services? Because according to these invoices, Elena held up a thick folder, the HOA paid your company $9,000 for landscape consultation during months when no landscaping work was approved or completed. Robert stood up next. She charged me $75 for removing invasive vegetation from my memorial garden. Turns out those checks went to her consulting company too. Jennifer's voice carried from the middle rows. My sidewalk cleaning violation. She told me the fine would go to Community Beautification Fund, but the check was written to Cromwell Consulting. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Retirees who'd been clutching assessment letters started clutching them for entirely different reasons. Furthermore, Elena continued, her courtroom voice now fully engaged, I'd like everyone to know that Mrs. Cromwell has been collecting fines and fees while our HOA's corporate status was dissolved 14 months ago due to unpaid state filing requirements. Dead silence. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. What does that mean? Called out Mrs. Patterson from Pine Street. Elena's voice was gentle but crystal clear. It means every fine, every fee, every assessment collected in the past 14 months has been deposited into accounts controlled by Mrs. Cromwell for an organization that legally doesn't exist. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Someone's phone rang and got hurriedly silenced. A toddler chose that moment to loudly announce bathroom needs. Linda was standing at her folding table, mouth opening and closing like she was drowning in air. Then Robert's gravelly voice cut through the silence. Lady, are you telling us you've been stealing our money? The basement erupted like a shaken soda bottle. Stealing? Linda's voice cracked higher than a teenager's. I have worked tirelessly for this community. Every fee collected goes directly to maintenance and improvements. Then you won't mind showing us the bank statements, Elena said calmly. That's when Linda made her final mistake. She grabbed her briefcase, knocked over her folding chair, and stormed toward the basement stairs, while shouting something about ungrateful neighbors and consulting her attorney. The slam of the community center door echoed through that basement like a judge's gavel. What Linda didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Elena had spent the previous week working with her paralegal friend Maria at the courthouse, diving deep into HOA corporate records and banking regulations that most people find more boring than watching paint dry. When Elena filed that Colorado Open Records Act request, she wasn't fishing for information. She knew exactly what she was looking for because she'd seen similar cases cross her bench. Small-time fraud usually follows predictable patterns, and HOA embezzlement has its own special flavor of arrogance. The smoking gun was sitting in plain sight at the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Every HOA must file annual reports like any corporation. Miss 2 consecutive years, and your corporate status gets dissolved automatically. It's like forgetting to renew your driver's license, except the consequences involve thousands of dollars in potentially illegal fee collection. Linda had missed filing in 2022, 2023, and 2024. For 14 months, she'd been collecting money on behalf of an organization that, legally speaking, no longer existed. Every fine, every assessment, every consulting fee paid to her company had been deposited into accounts she controlled personally, not corporate HOA accounts with proper oversight. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. The main course was what Maria discovered when she cross-referenced Linda's violation patterns with fair housing discrimination databases. Linda's targeting wasn't random. She'd systematically gone after households fitting specific profiles, elderly residents who might pay rather than fight, single parents too busy to research their rights, families who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection, Robert's veteran license plate frame, Jennifer's children's chalk art, the widow's bird bath, my wife's wildflowers. Every violation had been carefully chosen to target people who were either vulnerable or different. Over $28,000 had disappeared into accounts only Linda could access. Money collected from neighbors who trusted their HOA president to follow the law while she was busy inventing regulations that didn't exist and enforcing covenants for an organization that had legally ceased to exist. Elena spread the evidence across our kitchen table that night, like a general planning a decisive battle. Bank records, corporate filings, violation notices, timestamps, photographs, everything needed to prove systematic fraud and discrimination. "We could report this to the district attorney tomorrow," she told me, sipping evening tea while reviewing financial documentation. "Linda would probably plea bargain, pay restitution, get probation. But that doesn't help Robert get his memorial garden back. Doesn't compensate Jennifer for the anxiety she felt every time she saw Linda's car in her driveway. Doesn't fix the fact that this woman has been terrorizing our neighbors for 2 years." Elena had that look in her eyes, the same expression I'd seen when she sentenced career criminals who showed no remorse for their victims. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about making sure the harm stopped and the community healed. "So, what do you want to do?" she smiled. This time it wasn't her courtroom smile or her neighborly smile. This was her "David, you're going to love this" smile. "I want to give Linda Cromwell exactly what she's been demanding all along. A community that follows the rules, all of them, including the ones about fraud, embezzlement, and discriminatory enforcement." The taste of Elena's chamomile tea mixed with the sweet anticipation of justice being carefully planned. Outside our kitchen window, the wildflower garden bloomed in defiant colors under streetlight glow, every petal a small victory waiting for the war to end. The next morning, our kitchen became mission control for what Elena called Operation Native Justice. By 8:30 a.m., we had assembled what looked like the world's most unlikely legal team around our breakfast table. Elena sat at the head with her laptop and legal pads covered in precise handwriting. Robert brought military-issued organizational skills and a manila folder thick as a dictionary. Jennifer showed up with her smartphone, portable printer, and the kind of social media expertise that makes millennials dangerous when properly motivated. The smell of Elena's famous banana bread mixed with printer ink and righteous indignation as we mapped out our three-pronged counterattack. "First priority," Elena announced, spreading documents across our table like battle plans. "We restore the HOA's legal standing properly. Robert, you're going to be our new president." Robert nearly choked on his coffee. "Ma'am, I just want to grow tomatoes without getting fined. And you will. But first we need someone with integrity to rebuild this organization from scratch. Someone who's actually served his community instead of serving himself." Elena explained Colorado's HOA restoration process. Any dissolved homeowner association can be revived by filing articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State, paying back fees, and holding proper elections with adequate notice to all residents. It's simpler than most people think, which probably explains how Linda got away with ignoring it for so long. The legal technicality most folks miss is buried in Colorado Revised Statutes 38 to 33.3.317. When an HOA's corporate status dissolves, any covenants requiring membership in a corporation become temporarily unenforceable until proper legal standing is restored. Linda hadn't just been collecting illegal fees, she'd been enforcing rules she had no authority to enforce. "Second priority," Elena continued, "we freeze those accounts and recover our neighbors' money. Jennifer, this is where your documentation skills become crucial." Jennifer had been quietly building a database on her laptop, cross-referencing every violation notice with bank deposit dates and amounts. Her background in social media marketing meant she understood data tracking better than most forensic accountants. Every fee Linda collected, every threat she made, every discriminatory comment has been logged with timestamps and screenshots, Jennifer said, scrolling through her files. "I've got 2 years of Nextdoor posts where she complained about certain types of people not understanding community standards, plus Ring doorbell footage from 4 different neighbors showing her taking photographs without permission. The financial recovery required calling in favors from Elena's courthouse network. Maria had connected us with a civil attorney who specialized in HOA fraud cases. Turns out homeowners who've been illegally assessed can recover triple damages under Colorado consumer protection laws, plus attorney fees. "Third priority," Elena said, her voice taking on that courtroom authority tone. "We make sure this never happens to anyone else in any neighborhood." This was where Elena's judicial experience became invaluable. She'd seen enough small-time criminals to know that people like Linda don't usually limit their schemes to one location. A quick search of business licensing records revealed that Cromwell Consulting Services had management contracts with 3 other HOAs across Colorado Springs. Robert leaned back in his kitchen chair, the same chair where he'd probably planned military operations decades ago, and grinned. "You're talking about taking down a whole network of these parasites." "I'm talking about following the evidence wherever it leads," Elena corrected, "and making sure every homeowner in Colorado knows their rights." Jennifer's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm that makes social media campaigns go viral. "I can create a resource website, HOA rights, legal procedures, warning signs of fraud, make it searchable by neighborhood." The amusing part of our planning session came when we realized we were essentially organizing a neighborhood watch against our own neighborhood watch president. Robert suggested we call ourselves the Covenant Enforcement Committee, which made Elena laugh so hard she nearly spilled coffee on her legal documents. But the real genius of Elena's strategy was the timeline. Instead of rushing to expose Linda immediately, we were going to let her keep digging her own grave while we built an airtight case. "Every violation notice she issues from now on adds another count to the fraud charges," Elena explained. "Every dollar she tries to collect becomes additional evidence. Every discriminatory comment gets documented by people who now know what to look for." By noon, we had filed articles of incorporation to restore Maplewood Heights HOA as a legitimate organization. Robert was officially our interim president pending proper elections. Jennifer had created a private Facebook group for affected neighbors to share evidence safely. And Elena, she was preparing for the kind of legal showdown that would make Linda wish she'd stuck to processing insurance claims instead of terrorizing neighborhoods. The taste of victory was already sweet on our tongues, mixed with lingering banana bread flavors, and the satisfaction of good people finally fighting back. Linda didn't take losing control gracefully, and what she did next crossed every possible line. Within 72 hours of our kitchen war council, she launched what military folks would call a scorched earth campaign. If she was going down, she was determined to take everyone with her, starting with Elena's professional reputation. The first attack came as a formal complaint to the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. 4 pages of single-spaced accusations claiming Elena was using her judicial position to intimidate a dedicated volunteer and create unfair advantages in civil disputes. She accused Elena of judicial bias, conflict of interest, and my personal favorite, weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. The complaint landed on Elena's courthouse desk Wednesday morning. She read it during her lunch break, then calmly filed it in what she calls her "People Who Don't Understand How Ethics Work" folder. "David," she told me that evening while deadheading her resilient wildflowers, "Linda just made her biggest tactical error. She's challenged a sitting judge on procedural grounds without understanding basic judicial ethics." But Linda wasn't finished. Thursday brought a private investigator, and the lengths she went to will blow your mind. I was replacing a broken sprinkler timer in our front yard when a guy in an ill-fitting suit started photographing our house from his car. Not discreet photos, the kind where he held his camera up to the window, like he was documenting a crime scene. When I waved and started walking toward him, he drove off fast enough to leave tire marks on the pavement. Jennifer's Ring doorbell caught him that afternoon, lurking around Elena's judicial parking space at the courthouse. By evening, Robert's veteran network had identified him as Gary Preston, a bottom-feeder PI who specialized in domestic surveillance and had a reputation for taking cases legitimate investigators wouldn't touch. The harassment escalated to personal attacks by Friday. Anonymous flyers started appearing on car windshields throughout our neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of Elena in her judicial robes with headlines like "Corrupt Judge Living Among Us" and "Is Your Neighbor Above the Law?" The typography looked like it came from a 1970s conspiracy newsletter, complete with dramatic fonts and excessive exclamation points. But the real low point came Saturday morning. I was loading soil amendments at the garden center when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "That's the husband, the judge's husband. They think they're better than everyone else." Linda was standing 2 aisles over, talking loudly to anyone who would listen about the corrupt judicial family that was destroying property values and bringing crime to our peaceful neighborhood. She'd positioned herself near the checkout line where maximum people would hear her performance. The woman had graduated from HOA President to full-time character assassination specialist. That afternoon, Elena got a call from her court administrator, Someone had filed a complaint claiming she was hearing cases involving parties from our neighborhood, creating conflicts of interest. The complaint was anonymous, but the administrator recognized Linda's insurance company letterhead from previous frivolous filings. They want me to recuse myself from all municipal cases involving HOAs, Elena told me, her voice carrying the dangerous calm that defense attorneys learn to recognize. Every parking dispute, every zoning violation, every small claims case involving any homeowner association in the entire county. The absurdity was breathtaking. Linda was essentially demanding that a municipal court judge disqualify herself from a significant portion of her docket because one HOA president couldn't handle being caught in systematic fraud. But Sunday night brought the escalation that crossed every possible line. And you won't believe what Linda did next. Elena's 82-year-old father was visiting from Pueblo, staying with us for his annual summer visit. Dad was watering the wildflower garden before dinner when Linda marched across the street like she was leading a one-woman invasion. "Excuse me," Linda announced, startling Dad so badly he dropped the watering can. "You need to tell your daughter to stop this harassment immediately." My father-in-law, bless his heart, looked at this perfectly coiffed suburban terrorist and said, "I'm sorry, miss. Do I know you? I'm the HOA president, and your daughter is destroying our community with her vindictive legal attacks. As her father, you have a responsibility to control her behavior. Control her behavior." Like Elena was a misbehaving teenager instead of a sitting judge. Robert happened to be walking his dog and witnessed the entire encounter. By the time I got outside, Dad was shaking, not from fear, but from pure rage at being told to control his accomplished daughter by someone who'd been stealing from neighbors. That night, Elena sat at our kitchen table reviewing judicial ethics guidelines while Dad told the story for the third time, getting angrier with each retelling. The smell of Dad's stress-baking chocolate chip cookies mixed with Elena's determination to end this once and for all. "She just threatened an elderly man to get to me," Elena said quietly. "That's not legal strategy, that's desperation. And desperate people, as any experienced judge knows, make the worst possible decisions under pressure." What Linda did next proved that point spectacularly. Monday morning brought Linda's nuclear option, a federal lawsuit that would become a masterclass in legal stupidity. The certified letter arrived at Elena's courthouse office, thick as a novel and twice as dramatic. Cromwell versus Chen, civil rights violation under color of law, was emblazoned across legal paperwork that must have cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Linda was suing Elena in federal court for violating her civil rights by using judicial authority to intimidate a private citizen engaged in lawful HOA governance. She demanded monetary damages, injunctive relief, and Elena's removal from the bench for constitutional violations and abuse of power. The lawsuit was legal nonsense wrapped in official-looking formatting, like putting a tuxedo on a garbage truck and calling it formal transportation. But nonsense or not, federal civil rights claims require responses, and responses require time Elena should have been spending on legitimate court business. "She's trying to bury me in paperwork," Elena explained over dinner, gesturing at the stack of legal documents with her fork. "Force me to spend thousands on defense attorneys while she plays victim in federal court." But Linda's masterstroke of stupidity came Tuesday afternoon when she decided to take her campaign directly to Elena's workplace. The confrontation that followed will go down in courthouse history. I was changing the oil in our truck when Elena called, her voice tight with controlled fury. "David, you need to get down to the courthouse now." I arrived to find Linda standing in the municipal court lobby with a homemade sign reading, "Corrupt Judge Chen, where is justice?" She'd positioned herself directly in front of the security checkpoint, where every defendant, attorney, and court employee had to see her one-woman protest. The lobby smelled like industrial disinfectant and decades of legal anxiety, but today it carried an extra tang of second-hand embarrassment as court personnel tried to ignore the middle-aged woman having a public breakdown 20 feet from active courtrooms. "This judge uses her position to terrorize innocent homeowners," Linda announced to anyone within earshot. "She thinks she's above the law. Where's the accountability?" Court security had called Elena's chambers, who'd called the chief judge, who'd called me because they couldn't legally remove someone from a public courthouse lobby without cause, even if that someone was making a spectacle that would embarrass a reality TV show. That's when Detective Mike Kowalski walked through the security checkpoint, for his afternoon testimony in an unrelated case. Mike had appeared before Elena's bench probably 60 times over the past 3 years. Domestic violence cases, DUI arrests, minor drug possession charges, the routine parade of municipal court business that keeps small cities functioning. He knew Elena as the fair, methodical judge who never let personal feelings interfere with legal proceedings. He also knew crazy when he saw it. "Ma'am," Mike said in his professional cop voice, approaching Linda's impromptu protest, "is there a problem here?" "Yes, there's a problem," Linda whirled around, sign wobbling. "This corrupt judge is using her position to persecute me for doing my job as an HOA president." Mike glanced at the sign, then at the courthouse security cameras recording everything, then back at Linda. "And you are?" "Linda Cromwell, president of Maplewood Heights HOA. That woman," she pointed dramatically toward the courtroom doors, "is hearing cases that directly benefit her personal vendetta against my community leadership. The beautiful thing about courthouse lobbies is that they're designed for maximum acoustic clarity." Every word of Linda's rant was carrying into adjacent courtrooms where attorneys were probably wondering if someone had accidentally broadcast a daytime soap opera over the intercom system. Mike pulled out his notebook, the same one he used for actual crime scenes. "What specific cases has Judge Chen heard that involve you personally?" "Well, I mean, she hasn't heard any yet, but she could. It's the potential for bias that matters." "So you're protesting a judge for cases she hasn't heard, involving matters that haven't happened?" Linda's face cycled through several interesting colors as she realized she'd just described her federal lawsuit to a police detective in language that made it sound exactly as frivolous as it actually was. But the real plot twist came when Mike asked for her identification and ran her name through the system during what he later described as routine verification of a potential disturbance complainant. Turns out Linda had 4 unpaid parking tickets and a bench warrant for failure to appear on a speeding violation from 8 months ago. The same municipal court system she was protesting had issued a warrant for her arrest that she'd been ignoring while filing federal lawsuits about judicial corruption. The irony was so thick, you could have served it with dinner and called it the main course. "Ma'am," Mike said, his voice taking on the formal tone that means someone's day is about to get significantly worse, "I need you to come with me." Linda's homemade protest sign hit the courthouse floor with a pathetic cardboard slap as Mike explained that her outstanding warrant required immediate resolution, either through posting bond or spending the evening as a guest of the county jail system. The taste of justice was finally getting sweet enough to savor. 4 days later, Linda made the phone call that would end her reign of suburban terror forever. And the reason she dialed 911 will leave you speechless. "I was cleaning gutters when Elena's phone rang inside the house. Through our open kitchen window, I could hear her voice shift from casual conversation to professional alertness in about 2 seconds. "Yes, this is Judge Chen. What? Are you certain?" "No, officer. I'll be right there." Elena appeared in our doorway, car keys already in hand, wearing that expression she gets when someone's about to learn why lying to judges is a catastrophically bad life choice. "Linda just called 911, she said, unable to suppress a slight smile. "She's reporting me for destroying community property and demanding my immediate arrest for vandalism." "The community property in question?" "My wife's wildflower garden, the same native Colorado plants that had started this whole mess 4 months ago, now blooming in defiant splendor despite Linda's chemical warfare attempts." Apparently, Linda had convinced herself that since she was the HOA president and the HOA governed community standards, and the garden violated her interpretation of community standards, then the garden technically belonged to the community, and Elena was destroying it by continuing to tend flowers she'd planted in her own yard. The logic was so twisted, it could have been used to teach philosophy students about the dangers of circular reasoning. I grabbed my phone and called Robert. "You need to get over here now and bring everyone." By the time the squad car arrived, half our neighborhood had materialized on sidewalks and front lawns like we'd all received the same supernatural summons. Robert stood on our driveway with his arms crossed, looking like a retired drill sergeant, ready to defend democracy. Jennifer had positioned herself strategically with her phone camera because she understood that moments like this needed documentation. Even Mrs. Patterson from Pine Street had shuffled over with her walker, determined not to miss whatever was about to happen. The police cruiser rolled up slowly, probably because Officer Mike Kowalski could see the crowd gathering and wanted to assess the situation before stepping into what looked like a neighborhood uprising. The morning air carried the sweet scent of Elena's lavender border, mixed with the anticipation of community justice finally being served. Linda stood on her manicured lawn wearing a pressed business suit at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, holding a folder thick as a municipal code book and pointing at Elena like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. "There she is," Linda announced as Mike stepped out of his cruiser. "The woman who's been systematically destroying our community property in defiance of lawful HOA authority." Mike looked at Elena, who was kneeling peacefully beside her coneflowers, in faded jeans and a gardening shirt, trowel in one dirt-covered hand. Then he looked at Linda, who was vibrating with righteous indignation in her power suit. Then he looked at the growing crowd of neighbors, all of whom were staring at Linda like she'd just announced her intention to declare war on gravity. "Ma'am," Mike said in his most professional voice, "can you explain exactly what crime is being committed here?" "Destruction of community property, violation of HOA covenants, defiance of lawful authority." Brenda waved her folder like it contained the Constitution itself. Mike walked slowly toward Elena, who stood up and brushed dirt from her knees with the dignity of someone who'd never doubted that truth eventually wins over theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, and those two words hit the morning air like a judge's gavel. The effect on our gathered neighbors was immediate and electric. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open. Jennifer's phone camera never wavered, but her eyes went wide. Even Robert, who'd known about Elena's profession for months, stood a little straighter. But the effect on Linda was absolutely devastating. Her pointing finger froze mid-accusation. The folder slipped from her suddenly nerveless grip, scattering papers across her perfect lawn like legal confetti. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, producing no words but plenty of strangled squeaks. "Your Honor," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Judge Elena Chen, Colorado Municipal Court," Elena said calmly, extending her dirt-covered hand to Mike, who shook it with the respect due to someone he'd worked with professionally for 3 years. The crowd murmur started low and built like distant thunder. Whispered conversations, nervous laughter, the sound of people realizing they'd been witnessing David versus Goliath, except David had been wearing judicial robes under her gardening clothes the entire time. "Ma'am," Mike said to Linda, his voice carrying the kind of patience usually reserved for people experiencing obvious mental health episodes, "are you filing a complaint that a municipal court judge is gardening in her own yard?" Linda's face went through more color changes than a traffic light having an electrical malfunction. The HOA, my authority." Then Robert stepped forward, his veteran's voice cutting through the morning air like a command. "Officer, this woman has been stealing money from our neighborhood for 2 years. The dominoes fell faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. What happened next transformed our entire community forever." Within 72 hours of Mike's impromptu arrest report, Linda had resigned from every HOA position she held, not just in our neighborhood but across all 3 communities where Cromwell Consulting Services had been operating. Her federal lawsuit against Elena was dismissed with prejudice, legal speak for "don't ever bring this ridiculous nonsense to court again." The Colorado Attorney General's office moved with surprising speed once the media picked up the story. Turns out nobody likes headlines about suburban tyrants stealing from retirees, especially during an election year. Linda pled guilty to theft, fraud, and filing false police reports. She received 4 years probation, full restitution to every affected homeowner, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution checks were almost as satisfying as watching her perp walk, though Robert insisted the real victory was when his tomato plants won first prize at the county fair 4 months later. We held our first legitimate HOA election that November, with proper notice and actual ballots, instead of Linda's usual "all in favor, raise your hand while I'm not looking" method. Robert won president unanimously, though he spent his acceptance speech complaining that he'd never wanted the job in the first place. Jennifer became our treasurer, mostly because she was the only person under 65 who understood spreadsheets and social media documentation. The recovered funds, almost $38,000, including interest and penalties, transformed our neighborhood. We established a community garden where Linda's former consulting fees helped neighbors grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers, that actually belonged in Colorado soil. The scent of fresh basil and tomatoes now mingles with Elena's wildflowers every summer morning, a living reminder that communities thrive when people work together instead of against each other. Robert donated part of his military pension to create the Maplewood Educational Scholarship, helping local kids study law, public service, or agricultural sciences. 4 recipients so far, including Jennifer's daughter, who wants to become a civil rights attorney after watching her mum fight back against discrimination. But the crown jewel was our first annual Wildflower Festival, held exactly 1 year after Linda's arrest. The sound of children's laughter mixed with bluegrass music, as Elena's garden served as the centerpiece, surrounded by booths featuring native plant societies, and Robert's famous military-grade barbecue that you could smell from 4 blocks away. More importantly, we'd rebuilt something Linda's reign had nearly destroyed: the simple pleasure of neighbors actually caring about each other. Kids play in streets without fear of violation notices. Elderly residents plant memorial gardens in peace. Young families display decorations that reflect their actual heritage instead of beige conformity. Elena's wildflower garden became a state landmark, featured in Colorado Living magazine, and studied by universities researching native plant restoration. The irony wasn't lost that Linda's property value destruction actually increased home values by 18% as word spread about our inclusive, well-managed community. The legal precedent helped other Colorado neighborhoods fight similar fraud. The state legislature passed the Cromwell Accountability Act, requiring stronger HOA oversight and financial transparency. Elena speaks at judicial conferences nationwide, always emphasizing that justice works best when applied fairly to everyone, regardless of their clipboard-carrying authority. Last month, a new resident asked Robert about our reputation for being drama-free and well-managed. Robert grinned, the taste of his morning coffee mixing with satisfaction. Drama-free, we had enough drama to last through retirement. Difference is, we got rid of the person causing it. As for Linda, she moved to Arizona where she's already been cited for pool violations and aggressive behavior toward maintenance staff. Some people never learn. Here's your takeaway. Always request proof your HOA filed required state paperwork before paying disputed fines. Document everything with timestamps and photos. Know that discriminatory enforcement patterns can trigger federal investigations. Most importantly, find your community's Robert, someone willing to stand up when bullies think clipboards make them kings. Your HOA horror stories help others recognize warning signs and fight back. Drop your worst nightmare in the comments below. We read every single one and feature the craziest stories in future episodes. Subscribe to HOA Stories and ring that notification bell if you believe good neighbors beat petty tyrants every time. We've got dozens more tales of justice served suburban style, including next week's episode about the parking enforcer who tried to ticket the fire chief's car while he was responding to an emergency call. Community justice tastes sweeter than Elena's wildflower honey, and that's saying something. You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens Get a Reality Check. If this episode gave you secondhand rage or satisfaction, hit that like button, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're first in line for more weekly HOA chaos.